Executive presence is an interesting conversation that women are having right now. As a woman in corporate America, a woman of color in corporate America, where do you land on that spectrum?
Oh, the reality is the barometer or the threshold that people are measuring themselves is a white male. That's the reality when we say executive presence. I have been told for many years in my corporate career that I did not have executive presence. I was told that. I went from Procter & Gamble to Botox to Target to Pizza Hut. And so thus I had a whole new set of people telling me how they think that I should operate in corporate America. That left me really confused. Who am I and how do I want to show up? What I knew was how to show up for folks, how to be empathetic. And so how I navigated corporate was for the most part trying to be my authentic self.
Joining me today is Cherise Williams. I am so excited to introduce you to her. She is a director at Maker's Mark, but she is mostly a personal branding and marketing expert and a cultural catalyst. I'm so excited to dive into what that means. She is an inclusive leadership expert. She has worked for brands like Secret, Gillette, Target, Pizza Hut, and Maker's Mark, such different brands. And she also is very involved in nonprofits. She's a mommy of two bold and sassy girls. We're going to talk about that as well. So welcome to my show, Cherise. Thank you so much for joining me today.
And thanks for having me, Michelle. It was a pleasure meeting you earlier this summer and on women's leadership, right? And so I think I love to go deeper into all the things we talked about in that quick little intro.
Me too. Yes, I'm really excited that you're here. I always start out my show because my show is about strategic reinvention, and you know, both on the personal side and on the business side. But the way I like to lead off is to ask all of my guests really about their strategic reinvention. So the question I like to ask is, you know, we've all had that one moment where you were so far down in the ditch that you really didn't think you would see tomorrow. And when any of us are in that ditch, you think you're alone and you think nobody has ever possibly been in that ditch before. Tell me about your ditch moment and tell me about what it looked like when you were there and how you got out of it.
Oh gosh, are you ready for this one?
Hey, I go deep quick.
Well, I will take you back to 2020. And for many folks, that was a tough year for all of us, right?
100%.
On my lens, I had recently, and we'll start from January and kind of work our way through the year, right? January, I was notified I was pregnant, a high-risk pregnancy. I have an autoimmune disease, and I was always told that autoimmune disease would impact my fertility. And so at that moment, they said, you know, you are high risk. We have to monitor you every week. And don't stress. Don't stress, because a key trigger for autoimmune diseases, of course, is stress. And I said, okay. Well, then maybe 3 weeks later, I found out my mom was diagnosed with cancer,
Oh
with
my
stage 3
gosh.
colon cancer. And I'm like, I can't stress? Not on this one? Um, and unfortunately, about 2 weeks later, the world shut down with the pandemic. So I was in a state by March-ish, right? Kind of fast forward, where I was trying to protect my child's life and my life. I was also concerned about my mom, who was in Michigan, who lives alone, going through cancer, stage 3. And then, you know, I have the world, right? And we're having friends and family and everyone that's just impacted. And it was in those moments where I had to recalibrate how I operated. And it was, as I tell people, that an autoimmune disease and a child saved my life in a sense. Because whereas everyone else was, you know, panicking, right? And it was the media, I had to tune out. I had to focus. I had to center in and to carry through those 9 months, even though I had people passing, dying. I had my mother-in-law at the time who did end up in the hospital for 8 weeks. And so, and then my father-in-law passed away. And so you have all these incidences happening, right? Again, naturally for all of us. And then I had to internalize, I had to visualize, I had to think differently about how I wanted to navigate that in order to protect my child. I was able to gratefully navigate through those 9 months and have a successful child pregnancy. But then I ended up back in the hospital with a blood clot in my lungs
Oh my
a day
gosh.
later.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
So you
A
started deep.
day later?
I was, here's the crazy part, and this is, I think it's important for your audience. I was released. The one thing for most people that were having babies during the pandemic, you had to be in there alone. I did have an older child where my spouse had to watch her. And so I was alone for most of my stint during my pregnancy. And again, those hospital visits every week had to happen during the pandemic, by the way. So I would be hooked up every Friday. So it's just a tough time. But just so blessed to be able to have a, successful pregnancy at UT Southwestern, great doctors there to monitor me. But as I was released during Labor Day weekend of all weekends, um, my friend who lived in Michigan said something that she called me, said something doesn't feel right. You need to go back to the hospital. And I'm like, girl, you are crazy. I just escaped all of that.
Were
I am
you
home.
having some physical symptoms or was it just
I
an
can't recall what
intuition?
I told her that made her say, you need to head back, but I was just like, absolutely not. It is Labor Day weekend in Dallas. It is a pandemic, outright, like all the hospital beds are packed. And she just kept saying, no, you have to go. And I ignored her and I went to sleep. And I woke up and I still felt something was off. I couldn't tell you even to the date what was off. And I finally said, all right, I'll pack my little bag, told my spouse, hey, can you hold down the fort? Again, newborn at home, older 3-year-old. I'm just gonna take a, Uber to the ER and just see what happens. Which is scary. Again, I'm putting myself in harm's way during that time, right? And 5 hours later, they found a blood clot in my lungs
Oh
and
my
had to readmit me.
gosh.
Yeah. And so those were some just, external situations that were happening, right? And I was on blood thinners for the balance of the year, consistently injections. Um, it was a true test of how to kind of block out all the noise. Stress was a part of my DNA. It was something that I just naturally, I was a worry wart. I stressed out. I've had a very fruitful career, which I know we'll talk about. I've navigated a lot of challenges. Sometimes I'll bring some of that home. But it was in that year of 2020 where I really had to think differently. I really had to think about life and death, truly. So when you talk about, being down in a ditch, I was on a bed, right, where I had to face a reality several times around how do I want to sustain my life, my child's life, and that was very tough. And so from there, I've had to, and this was just 5 years ago, which is wild to think about, but it has really shifted the way in which I've operated. Most people say, Cherise, you're very poised, you're very calm, you're very this, you come off as this, and I'm like, yeah, I had to. It wasn't an option for me to train myself because let me be clear, during those months that I was pregnant, I was working just like everyone else. We were working from home. I was trying to balance having a 3-year-old at the house who, and quite frankly, I also was in a marriage that wasn't going well, and have since, divorced. And so there were so many factors that year that really just shifted the way I've operated.
So
Um,
you were not only feeling alone, I mean, you were
oh,
actually physically alone because of the pandemic and being in the hospital.
yeah.
How did you keep your mindset right? Like what did you use to just keep yourself mentally in a good place? Or did you? I mean, that had to be so
Well,
hard.
it was very hard. I'll be honest. I had to eliminate myself from the group chats,
Yeah.
right? And, some people probably in my network don't understand how literally someone posting the news every day or such and such has passed away, those things were triggering for me,
Right, of
right?
course.
Because I'm actually a very deeply empathetic person. And so when I was digesting all this stuff that was happening in the world, that was not helping. So I had to make choices to eliminate myself from social media, to opt in or opt out of certain conversations, without coming off, and I think that was also an interesting time. I don't want to come off as I don't care or I'm aloof. It was truly a matter of life or death for me and how I had to navigate, right? And quite frankly, it still is, right? My autoimmune disease is triggered still by stress. And so to see a parent who was, for the most part, a healthy parent, right? My mother is still living, thank God. She's still she's in remission right now, but to see someone that was relatively healthy, live alone, single parent, and to all of a sudden go from healthy to stage 3, that was a wake-up call for me as well, because some of the, as I mentioned, navigating corporate America, navigating the boards that I was sitting on, navigating my marriage,
And the
realizing that
pandemic, I mean,
in the pandemic, realizing all those things were probably slowly nipping at my health, my mental health, my physical health. And I think seeing my mother go through that was a realization of, okay, I need to take care of myself. And I know we all say that, right? We all think that, but it was seeing those tangible examples in front of me, realizing that I now have a choice. I'm making choices every day, but now I see my tangible choices in front of me. And yeah, it was really kind of a block out of all things. And I still operate that way,
yeah.
quite frankly.
So what would you say to somebody else that was kind of going through? I mean, I can't imagine anybody going through a similar situation. I mean, hopefully we will never go through a pandemic again like that, but going through all the other things that you went through at the same time. But if somebody were going through something that felt as overwhelming as that, what advice would you give them to navigate through that like you did?
It's interesting because I wouldn't say I'm fully there. I still have my moments. In fact, this is a tough week, quite frankly, at work. But referencing books like the Let Them theory or other books that really help me think about how much weight or energy am I putting towards other people's problems. I do that often because, again, being empathetic, I'm a consultant, I'm a coach, I'm a leader of 21 people. So I'm constantly
Putting into
digesting
others, yeah.
others and being okay being selfish, right? And I think that's often used as a negative word, right? You're selfish. You're not thinking about anyone else. Well, this is my life. There are times where I'm going to have to hyper focus on me. And that is inclusive of kids, right? There are times I'm going to have to be mindful of how I pour into myself so that I can be a better mother, right? And so I think the lesson is to truly be mindful of the energy that we're exhausting with other people and their issues and their challenges. And just ensuring that you have a healthy balance. I'm not saying you can't be there and supportive, right? I certainly still have to be supportive for my mom and for my kids, and friends, but I'm more focused and dedicated on making sure that my cup is full, before I start to pour it into others.
Kinda
And that
like,
does,
what a
yeah.
friend of mine says is to put the oxygen mask on yourself first, you know?
Yeah, and I think that, as I've gone to therapy, as I do more devotions, as I do more journaling has been a really good one for me because, I have felt alone. I do live in Dallas, with my kids, and my co-parent is also still in Dallas, but the rest of my family is in Michigan or scattered throughout. And so, being here in Texas for 11 years, having to navigate, sometimes you don't always have someone to talk to, but you can still work through and get things out and journaling and prompts. And yeah, it's a level of peace, I'll tell you, that I feel currently today, knowing that I can choose to opt out of certain challenges. And so that's the guidance I give folks to really think about yourself for once, especially for many moms that I work with in my consulting with personal branding. A lot of folks define themselves based off of everyone else's definition of them versus like, who are you? Which I know we'll get into that a little bit later, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, we might as well go there now, but how do you view life balance? Like, I think that's a topic that is a little bit controversial right now. Some people say life balance is a myth, that, that you can only ever focus on one thing at one time. other people say, we have to have balance. You have to, do some of this and some of that. How do you view life balance, having your children and your corporate career, and then all the other things that are thrown at you as well?
I'm a huge advocate of vision boards. I have one in my office that I can stare at every day. And about 6 years ago, so actually prior to my current company, I made a decision and I said it out loud. I would no longer work for a company. The company will work for me. What I mean by that is a shift in who are you centering around? I want to ensure that I'm centering around myself and my vision and my purpose in this life. Um, and then everything else are like spokes, right? They should be complementary and support the vision I have for myself, for my purpose. So doing that intentional exercise through vision boarding, journaling of who am I and what is my purpose? And then how do I approach relationships? How do I approach uh, careers that support that? And so that is where balance for me, it's very it's very fluid. I don't actually use the word balance too much either because I do think it's about where are you focusing, and sometimes you can't focus on everything at one time. So I appreciate that my current company, which I've been at for 6.5 years, has been able to work for the lifestyle that I want to have. I do work from home, but I travel quite a bit.
How much are you
Uh,
traveling?
about 2 to 3 weeks a month.
Oh my goodness. Wow. So
Yes.
50 to 60, 70%.
Yes, it's a little absurd right now, but I manage a team of 21 across the country, and it is important for me as in my leadership practices to be present, to be engaged, to be understanding of their work, right? And so a little bit of it I put on myself. I'll be quite frank, because it's important for me to get out into the markets that they're at and get into their worlds and understand their challenges. And so, like I said, it could probably go back to like 2 weeks a month, sometimes even one time a month. But for the most part, it's me putting that energy into it. But the great news is, those days I'm traveling, my kids are with their co-parent, with their father, and so it works pretty fluidly again for the lifestyle that I want to have. Um, I think the other thing I had to work through, especially when I was running a nonprofit board in Dallas with the Black MBA Association, having my first child, having a pretty strenuous 9 to 5, was around segmenting. Now I'm a marketer, so I'm going to use a lot of marketing language, lingo sometimes, but it's about how do you segment your life and ensure that, the audience that you have in front of you is getting the best of you. And so I tell folks all the time, when I'm at work, I'm not the best mom. I don't have to be actually. Thank God I trust the teachers, or the yeah, my ex-spouse, right? So it's more around like, but when I'm with my kids, I am on.
See,
They get
I
me.
guess that's my view of life balance is like you're never going to have everything balanced at one time. Like to me, life balance is shoeboxes. I think of everything as in shoeboxes. It all comes back to shoes for us, right? So to me, it should be like when you're at work, you're 100% at work, you focus at work, and work is in work's shoebox. And then when you're at home with your kids, like you have to put the phone away as much as you can. I mean, sometimes you can't, but you have to, when you're at the kiddos, choir practice or softball game, or, when you're with your kiddos, you have to be with your kiddos. When you're with your spouse, you have to be with your spouse. When you're at church, you got to be with church. You can't be answering your phone at church.
Right.
And, so to me, I think of it, you say segmented, which is a much more professional word than shoeboxes, but I try to think of things in these relatable terms, right? And so I think of it as like shoeboxes on the shelf and putting it all in their little shoeboxes. And that's not a traditional balance term. It's more like when we're here, we're going to be here. And when we're here, we're going to be here.
Yeah, and I think it was a few things. Seeing my kids, I'm raising two daughters, right? We talked about little sassy, bossy women. You know, I had to be very mindful of what I was presenting to them. right? And it's something that actually I have self-awareness to understand what I saw. My mom being raised by a single parent, she was a special ed teacher. And so my mom would come home and or pick us up from school and she'd be on the phone just like decompressing with her best friend and just like always on the phone. She would come home and she would go in her room and close the door. The irony is, it was me and my older sister. So she was raising two daughters. I am as well. And I actually understood it. So I didn't take offense. I just was like, I get it. She's teaching and has a very rigorous, she's teaching high school special ed, a lot of nuances and how to, manage that and teach. Um, and, to think about her coming home and then having two daughters to raise, right? And so she would kind of decompress for about an hour or so. Then she'll come out and we'll figure out dinner and all of that. But I also remember like, hey, I kind of wish I had my mom, to talk about my day, but we kind of fell into this pattern. And so as I think about some of the things I wish were done differently, while I do understand it, I am cognizant of how I raise my daughters, right? Because it's easy to fall into the habits of what we've seen, right? Because we're comfortable. We got comfortable with a little bit of that dysfunction. And now with my daughters and some things that I want to shift, I am thinking differently. And so not always perfect. There are days where I'm like, kids, chill out. I got to talk through this, while I'm picking them up from school. But for the most part, I come home and it's like, if anything, if I get back into work, it is after dinner time, it is after they go to bed, and then I'm maybe picking up my laptop. And so I'm being very cognizant of giving them me, while they have me and them seeing also, and this is important, seeing me rest. I grew up in a lifestyle where my mom did everything, we did everything. Um, and again, as I correlate that to health, my mom was always on the go, always trying to do all the things, and I didn't really see her rest. And so I want my daughters to see a well-rested mom.
Yeah, and self-care.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was eye-opening when I one day sat on a couch, and that sounds like most people sit on the couch, right? I don't sit often. I get home and I'm just on my,
Right,
I'm
right.
homework, I'm this, I'm cooking, I'm this. And I sat down on the couch one day and both my daughters just came closer and closer and closer to me
Oh.
to the point where at first I was like, leave me alone, like,
You
and
wanted
I was like,
space. Then they wanted
but
to
then I just
snuggle.
embraced it. It was like they want their mom. And
Yeah.
for them to see me rested, is one of the greatest generational things I can pass down.
I want to ask you about being a corporate woman. Executive presence is an interesting conversation that women are having right now. There's a lot, on social media about how to portray executive presence and what are the characteristics of executive presence. And you can buy an internet course. I'll probably have one on my phone today on Instagram about executive presence. But then I heard Brene Brown say that she doesn't really believe in executive presence because that takes away from the individuality. As a woman in corporate America, a woman of color in corporate America, where do you land on that spectrum?
Oh, I have been told for many years in my corporate career that I did not have executive presence. I was told that. And I was given all the feedback on how I need to sharpen and, do all these different things, right? And I would say through my 20s, that left me really confused. Now this I was going into business. My mom was a teacher, my father was a firefighter, sergeant, a lot of my family that I grew up with were in the service industry. So I didn't necessarily have mentorship or people in my family saying, well, this is what it looks like in a business world, right? What I knew was how to show up for folks, how to be empathetic, right? These are things that were kind of entrenched in how I was raised. And so how I navigated corporate was for the most part trying to be my authentic self. But probably by the end of my 20s, I didn't know who I was because I had so many people trying to define and by the way, you mentioned all those great corporations and brands I've worked on, right? It was a lot. So in my 20s, every 2 years or so, I went from Procter and Gamble to Botox to Target to Pizza Hut and so thus I had a whole new set of people telling me how they think that I should operate in corporate America. All I would say with relatively good intent, but they didn't really understand that this was a woman, myself, who was trying to absorb, who was trying to be the best, right? That's how I was taught and raised to, show up and be the best. But by the end of my 30s, I'm just like, well, who am I? Because everyone else is telling me in these different companies, one person say, oh, you're this, and one person say, you're not this. And so it left me really, really confused. And so where I stand is exactly with Renee, is to be authentic. Because I've recognized, and I'm in my 40s now, but my 30s was kind of that test, if you will, of saying, okay, well, how do I really want to show up truly? Um, and again, it was also around that time where I just decided I want my company to work for me, right? So all of this is happening in the same frame where I'm like, well, who am I and how do I want to show up? The reality is the barometer or the threshold that people are measuring themselves is a white male. That's the reality when we say executive presence, right? And that makes sense because for many, many years, that's who held
That's who
those
still
titles.
dominates corporate.
Yes. But I don't think there was a lot of assessment on were those white men, for instance, were they driving culture? Were they driving deeper productivity? I don't know, right? But I know in the situations that I've had in managing very diverse groups that there were nuggets of ways that I can relate to them that encourage me to be more authentic, right? And to show them or be transparent with them. And so, I actually got feedback about 4 years ago. I was in a global leadership program, graciously invited with my company to be a part of a program, only 3 people from the US. And I was put into this program across the country in Australia and Japan. And I had a manager. I had to do a 360. Many people are familiar with like a 360 feedback where you go out, send out a survey, and people give you feedback on yourself. And I had a former manager, or I should say his colleagues. It's anonymous, but I can tell who wrote what. But I had someone say, well, Cherise jokes a lot. And that's not a good leadership trait. I joke a lot. Still in this day and age, someone says I joke a lot. And I just remember digesting some of the feedback and just it's just saying, well, they're out of touch. I refuse to receive that now that I've gotten more self-awareness. My ability to laugh, or one of the other feedback was, she's too poised. She needs to show that there's some urgency.
I don't even know
Uh,
what that means.
I can tell you, Michelle, either. All I know is I'm just learning to block out things that I know are irrelevant. I think that it's important as a leader to, especially if you're leading teams and trying to drive change, and that's what most leaders have to do these days. It is important to get to know your people, relate to them on a level, and to be able to actually have poise and articulate the challenges. So it's interesting how some people have always seen some of my strengths as weaknesses. Yeah. So I think the executive presence is really around, are you able to influence? Are you able to drive change? And what are the ways in which you're able to do that in flex? And for me, running nonprofit boards to corporate to raising girls to
Yeah.
having fun, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Um,
laughing.
yeah, it is important for me to be able to be adaptable.
Yeah.
And I would say I've been pretty successful at driving change and impact in the organization. And that's my barometer on executive presence.
Yeah, I've always kind of bristled a little bit at the term executive presence because it strikes me as like as a judgmental comparative word. Like who determines what
Correct.
executive presence is and who defines it? Who originally created this term and how are we defining it? Because I don't think it was me and I don't think it was you that created or created the original definition of it. And I think that, people like me, people like you bring a new, a new dynamic to executive presence that, like you said, most white men are not necessarily going to have in corporate America, that I think corporate America can benefit from. So yeah, I think I'm with you. I think that it's a term that I think I personally bristle a little bit from, because I think that we all have unique gifts that that we can bring to the authentic table.
Yeah, and I use words like cultural competency, use cultural catalyst, but also another key word I use often is exposure. I think it's important for leaders to have exposure to the world, right? To the marketplace in which we sell our products, but also to the people. And I think that you leverage a toolkit, if you will, to gain that exposure and to bring that insight into how you drive decisions. So that is, so to your point, how you show up in different environments matters, right? My team that I manage is a team of 21 across the country. And many of them come from the trade, or as we call it, behind the bar, right? I work in the spirits industry. And so they may not have had the same level of education or exposure I've had in corporate, but that doesn't mean that they're not valuable leaders in their market. And quite frankly, when I step into their world, I have to shift, right? I can't come in as and I do have my corporate lingo and my marketing, all of that, but I have to adjust in the ways in which I can get more insight. So I think executive presence is a level of like flexibility and adaptability, exposure and understanding, so that you can now start to drive impact with a very diverse group of consumers and employees.
Speaking of diverse consumers, I told you I was going to ask you this question. You've represented such a diverse group of brands, all these national brands: Secret deodorant, Gillette, Target, Pizza Hut, now Maker's Mark. Those seem to be some brands that are kind of more on the feminine side, some brands that are maybe more on the masculine side. How is marketing different, or is it different, if you're representing a brand that maybe markets more toward women, more toward men? Or are you trying to bring in maybe those differences more toward the middle? Like, how do you approach those different brands?
So my career started in consumer insights, which is not a typically familiar topic when you talk about marketing, although it is like the foundation of how marketing is executed. You have to understand consumers. And when I got my MBA in 2008, it was a recession, a big one.
Yes, it was.
And I bring that up for a reason, because while I was getting my MBA and I had that trajectory of, go up meet a CMO one day of a corporation. And so they typically teach you to go into brand management and you just start there, right? And work your way up. But I had a tough time, quite frankly, landing a role. I was living in Miami at the time. The world was crashing, and I didn't have a lot of exposure, access to other corporations that were, big corporations around the world. So in short, an opportunity landed for me to go into consumer insights. And at first I was like, I'm comparing myself to my colleagues who are doing this. And there was nothing wrong with consumer insights, just no one really talked about it. I would say that was the best decision of my career, because I spent 7 years deeply involved with understanding consumers, empathy, consumers from global to the United States, who are hyper focused on the nuances of Hispanic, right? I spent years studying that and being a consultant to many brands on how they need to evolve their brands or their products or their
Yes.
services, right? And so when you spend many years doing that, deep empathy, and not just observing, I would ask questions, right? I would get into the markets. And so that has enabled me to think about every brand differently. I don't just come in as a business person. I'm coming in with the empathy and the understanding. And so when I worked on Gillette, use that example. Yes, it's male, but I had to think about, well, we were building out, actually at that time, this is many years ago, 2009, we were building out skincare for Gillette. So at that point, it was just razors. And we were starting to work through some skincare, shampoos and face and all of that. And I had to go into it and sorry for the men who are going to hear this next part. A lot of men don't really talk about that stuff, right?
Yeah.
They just generally hadn't, back
Right.
especially,
Right.
2009. And I remember like it was yesterday, I created this study where I said, okay, let's correlate skincare to a starting five lineup of a basketball team. Okay, we can talk about a point guard and, we can talk about that. All right, so who's going to be in this position? Is your soap in this position? So I had to think about the ways in
To
which
make it
I could get
relatable.
certain
Yeah.
demographics to talk about
Yeah.
things.
I like
And it was so fun.
I like
It
that.
was it was fun because it allowed me to again enter into their world and say, all right, I know that you generally, think about the starting five of the Miami Heat or another basketball team, right? So where would you put this as far as in your skincare regimen? Like, who's the lead? Is it your shampoo? Is it your face care? And so that was just one example, and there's many others where, in order to unearth some insights and drive product development and innovation, we had to go deeper into how do we understand the audience in which we're trying to extract information from. And so that's applicable for men and women. So I've worked, yes, across a lot of different categories. I would tell you as a brand marketer, I never worked on anything I couldn't relate to.
Oh, that's
Now,
interesting. Yeah.
that doesn't mean I always directly used it, but I thought, I've interacted with men before. I have a father that was around, right? So I can understand how to think about skincare for men. Um, or even with Botox, when I worked on Botox at the time, I was relatively young and I wasn't at all thinking about using it. But I had to put myself in the mindset of, you know what? Well, I lived in Miami. It was a lot.
There's a lot of Botox in Miami.
It was a lot used there. And where our focus was with Botox at the time, and again, just to age myself, I was around 24, 25 working on it. I had to go back into my grad school days, living in Miami and thinking about the women that I would interact with. Our focus at the time was for anti-aging, which is, and I'm a consumer of Botox today, by the way. So there's no taboo there. But I had to think about, okay, we're focused on anti-aging. We're focusing on women who are, perhaps preparing for their kids' graduation. They want to, look refreshed and et cetera, right? So I had to put myself in their shoes and think about how to best market to that group. And so that's just the basis of how I navigate. And you'll see correlations in my life and it's my corporate life as well, is that deeper understanding of people, asking the questions, getting uncomfortable, right? To ask questions. And then that allows me to be pretty successful. And I tell folks I can market anything. Dog food, I've done it. Ice cream, I'm lactose intolerant, but I can gather enough insight on how to, uh, to to extract information from that audience and apply that towards the business.
I like that. So, lightning round here as we're wrapping up. Uh, as a marketing and personal branding expert, what are the adjectives that you hope others describe you as?
Oh, whew. Online or offline?
Is there a difference?
Well, to be clear, as a leader, it is important that I reflect certain values of my company. And I would say working in the spirits industry does allow a little bit of flex. The one thing I would say is, I want people to see that I embrace joy. I think that is so important in leadership and life, especially through the battles that I've faced.
Mhm.
And there's moments where I could have been depressed. I could have gone through a lot of different, emotions but joy is so pertinent. And I want people to see that leadership can be joyful as well. It's hard. It's very hard, but I try to incorporate that joy into how I lead and manage. Quite frankly, in my industry, we're selling alcohol, you
That's
know?
pretty joyful.
It's joyful, but it also isn't, there's other things we could be doing that are a lot more serious. And so I try to embed that. So joy, which can be characterized as goofy or silly or whatever, but I do try to incorporate that.
I like
I think it's also important to have that cultural competency as well. And what I mean by that is that ability to gain exposure and relevancy, to connect to anyone from any background. That is hyper important for me. To the competency, cultural competency, the joy, and the accountability. I am key on if I say I'm going to do it, I'm going to do
I
it.
like that.
And I want people, and I believe I've built a personal brand that lets people know from my leadership to my team, if I say I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. Now, maybe the how may look different from yours or the time frame, but I'm going to do it. I am a person of my word, and that has allowed me to flourish throughout my career.
I like that. What is the best piece of advice that you've ever been given?
I think it goes back to, it wasn't advice someone gave me per se, but it goes back to a conversation we had earlier on a quote. I can't recall who said it. I know Oprah or Michelle Obama has been noted, but you can have it all, but just not at once, not
Yeah.
all at once. And as we discussed, right, it's important to reframe life. I'm ambitious person, and sometimes I feel like all the things have to be perfect at the same time. I've now learned to say, yep, all right, everything's going right in my kids and this part. Oh, yep, but my home, my plumbing's crappy. Okay, well, just
Right.
just accepting that, not everything would be perfect all at one time. But again, if I think about segmenting my life, I think about my North Star, my vision board, it will all happen.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the biggest advice. I read it and I actually repeat it often when on panels and in my coaching is you can have it all, just not at once. So let's start to prioritize and segment out.
What content is influencing you right now? Podcast, books, whatever. What content is influencing you?
This may sound silly to say, but other people, I
Oh, I like
just
that.
interacting with more people. I, I, I think we talked about this. I started a podcast. It was not my intent to be a podcast girly or, bro or all that, but I wanted to have deeper conversations. And so I started to just connect with people and especially around the topics of personal branding. And I would say just every conversation, especially recently, I have with women in this transitionary period, oh, it's so inspiring. It's thoughtful. It makes me think about how I can support them. So I'm getting more content from just having these conversations that are impacting how I navigate more so than the news. I turn it off. I don't consume. And then books, I'm reading books that are helping me challenge how I, again, continue to center myself
And
and be thoughtful.
what book are you reading right now?
There was a book, and the name is going to slip me, but it's around, oh gosh, high functioning codependency.
Okay. Okay.
A friend recommended it to me, and the name is it slipped me, but I'll make sure you get the
Yeah.
title.
Yeah, definitely.
My friend, she was like, "Oh, you need to read this book. Sounds like you." And I was like, "Absolutely not.
Yeah.
I'm not codependent on nobody." And then I read it, and I was like, "Oh crap." I am high functioning codependent. And not to go too deep into it, I do recommend the book. But what it helped me understand, as much as I'm an independent woman and I'm navigating all this largely on my own, my codependency is actually on approval from people. It's on wanting to get that pat on the back. And again, I know we're going to run out of time, but that goes back
Yeah.
to childhood,
Yeah, of
right?
course.
And so starting to go deeper into myself and understanding some things I want to unpack. So again, I think that's a great book. The title may throw some folks off, but when you actually get into the content, you may be like, ooh. And again, similar to the let them theory, the premise is you got to let certain things go.
Yeah. What's
You
the
know,
most impactful book you've ever read?
oh gosh.
And you can't say the Bible.
Okay, this is going to sound silly too, but it's probably an unconventional answer. So back when I was a kid, there were books, and again, I'm in my 40s, so bear with me here, but there were books that you can read either front to back or back to front. I can't recall the way these books, how to classify that, but there was ways in which you can read a book, and most people read it and you start at one part and then you go all the way to the end. But I really love like starting at different parts of it or different chapters and it creating a different story. So again, that's my first reaction as you asked that question. But how it correlates is I don't think about life in a linear fashion. It's again, you can have it all and just not all at once. And as I start, some people think about I have to hit this stage and then this stage and this stage. I have to think through life a little bit differently. I had to think about other chapters or visualize some chapters and work backwards. I actually have a saying, future back. It's a corporate saying, but when I think about decisions, I think about the future and then what actions I need to take in order to get to that end, if that makes sense. And so my frame of life or how I think through life is I'm a visionary, but I'm also very strong at execution. And so just being able to visualize the ends of the book and then work my way back, or maybe say, hey, I'll start here and then go over here. Again, I know this is going all over the place, but I think that is probably my answer.
I like that.
The Bible's cool too. Yeah.
All right, final question. None of us know how many days or how long we have on this earth. If today were your last day, what do you want to be remembered for?
Impact and legacy.
I
We
like
should go hand in hand. But what I vow for everything I do is to leave it better than how I acquired it. Period. Whether that's the home I live in, the relationships, the jobs that I choose to take on. And by the way, I take on a lot of transformational jobs at this point in my career. So I'm the one that raises my hand and say, there's a challenge, I'll take that one on because I want to drive that sustainable legacy and impact. For people, I'm very keen on managing people, developing talent. And so I'm huge on that. It's applicable for everything. How do I think about the impact and influence on these people or on this entity? That is longstanding.
I like that.
So that would be my legacy. Yeah.
I like that. Thank you so much for joining me today. This conversation has been inspiring and informative. I've enjoyed it so much. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for giving me the platform. I know we kind of went off.
No, it's great. No, this has been wonderful. All right. Join me next time. Thank you, Cherise, for being here.